A big sleep. Chapter 1. Philip Marlowe and the Stern family. It was a typical late morning in Los Angeles when Private Detective Philip Marlowe walked into the office of General Sternwood. The dry heat of the city's early winter was nothing unusual, but Marlowe couldn't ignore the strange pull of the case that had just landed in his lap. The general, a wealthy, aging man, sat at his desk, his face hidden under the deep shadows of his office, while the room around him reeked of a past time, now faded and dusted with the residue of wealth and decay. The general had two beautiful but troubled daughters, Vivian, who seemed aloof and calculating, and the younger, more delicate Carmen. The latter had a reputation, one that wasn't easily shaken off. The case was simple. Enough General Sternwood hired Marlowe to investigate a blackmail scheme involving his daughters. But the story was darker than it appeared. Sternwood was old and suffering from a debilitating condition, and his mind was sharp but his body betraying him. Marlowe noted the tension in the air, the sense of a family teetering on the edge of collapse. Carmen Sternwood, despite her beauty, was a wild card. She was involved with men who were bad for her, possibly dangerous. Vivian, too, had her own secrets, and Marlowe could tell from the way she carried herself that she knew more than she let on. The investigation started innocently enough, but Marlowe, with his cynical nature and a nose for trouble, couldn't shake the feeling that this case was more than just a simple blackmail. Chapter 2. Unraveling the threads. Marlowe visited a gambling den later that day, a low-lit, smoky establishment run by the untrustworthy and dangerous Eddie Mars. The name Eddie Mars was a shadow over the city's criminal landscape, a man with fingers in every illicit pie, from gambling to loan sharking and everything in between. Marlowe was certain that Mars was tied up with the blackmailing operation involving Carmen Sternwood, though he had no solid proof. Still, a feeling gnawed at him as Marlowe mingled with the rough crowd. He couldn't ignore the sense of danger that crept in like an old, familiar companion. He was approached by a man named Norris, an underling of Eddie Mars, who told him that the general's daughters weren't the only ones with secrets. Mars was involved, and that meant things were about to get very complicated. Marlowe took a mental note of everything, every face, every glance, and every whispered conversation. His instincts told him that the key to the whole case rested in the dark dealings of Mars and his underlings. Later, Marlowe found himself sitting in a grimy office with a shady character named Bernie, a man who knew too much about the Sternwoods' personal lives. He spoke cryptically, dropping bits of information that led Marlowe deeper into the mystery. There was talk of gambling debts, of Carmen's wild nature, and of Vivian's past relationships with men like Mars. By the end of the night, Marlowe had pieced together more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Someone was playing a game with him, and it wasn't a game he was likely to win without stepping into a world darker than he had anticipated. Chapter 3. The Daughter's Secrets. The next day, Marlowe paid another visit to Vivian Sternwood. She was sharp, a woman who knew how to manipulate a conversation, and there was something in her eyes that made Marlowe suspect she was hiding just as much as her sister. Vivian was more than just a socialite, more than a woman with a hidden agenda. She was involved with powerful people, including Eddie Mars, who had been in her life long before Marlowe entered the picture. They had a tense conversation with Marlowe pushing her for more information. But Vivian was slippery. She spoke in riddles, hinting at her sister's dangerous behavior, but offering little concrete evidence. She warned Marlowe that Carmen's actions were unpredictable, and if he wanted to get to the bottom of the case, he would need to be careful. She seemed almost protective of her sister, despite all the damage Carmen had caused. Marlowe, ever the skeptic, didn't buy the act. He knew there was more going on between the Sternwood sisters than met the eye, but whether it was blackmail, love, or a twisted combination of both, he couldn't say yet. Later that night, Marlowe encountered Carmen at the edge of a confrontation that was about to escalate. Carmen's fragility seemed like an act, her erratic behavior covering up deeper, more dangerous motivations. She was caught in a vicious web of drugs, alcohol, and the men who preyed on her. Chapter 4. Eddie Mars, the puppet master. Marlowe's investigation took a dangerous turn when he finally faced Eddie Mars himself. The gambling kingpin wasn't a man who took kindly to being questioned, especially by a lone detective. Mars was used to controlling people through fear, through money, and through a network of shady associates. The tension between them was palpable, and Marlowe had to tread carefully, knowing that one wrong move could lead to serious consequences. In his encounter with Mars, Marlowe learned more about the man's complex relationships with both Vivian and Carmen. He discovered that Mars was deeply involved in the world of organized crime, and his connections extended far beyond Los Angeles. Mars was more than just a gambler. He was a master manipulator, pulling strings behind the scenes while maintaining a polished exterior. His influence over the Sternwood family was more significant than Marlowe had first assumed, and it was clear that solving the case would require more than just piecing together the lives of two troubled women. Through careful questioning and observation, Marlowe began to connect the dots. He learned of the mysterious disappearance of a man named Rusty Regan, a former associate of Mars, and realized that Regan's death was tied to the blackmail scheme involving Carmen. The case had grown darker, and Marlowe's curiosity pushed him further into the heart of the conspiracy. Chapter 5. A dangerous game. As the investigation progressed, Marlowe's world grew increasingly dangerous. He found himself caught between the manipulative forces of Mars, the fragile beauty of the Sternwood sisters, and the tangled web of criminal activity surrounding them all. He had moments of doubt, questioning his own ability to uncover the truth, but he was determined to press on. The final confrontation came unexpectedly, with Marlowe forced to face the harsh realities of the case. In the end, the pieces of the puzzle came together, revealing the true extent of the Sternwood family's troubles and the shocking truths behind the blackmail and murder. As Marlowe stood at the edge of the unfolding chaos, he realized that the big sleep, the final resolution to the case, wasn't just about solving a crime. It was about confronting the darkness inside the people he had encountered. Vivian, Carmen, Eddie Mars, and even himself. In a world ruled by deception, greed, and power, there was no easy escape. But for Marlowe, the game was always worth playing no matter the cost.